Okay, recording in progress. So welcome back to the second half. First half, we went over basically rendering, 3 things you need, the different types of rendering that we have available to us, kind of where we came from, where we're at right now. You know, some simple basics for resolution, anti-aliasing, image size, file format. Let's get into talking about actually how to render inside Arnold. All right, so let's take a look at what we're going to be doing today. So I'm going to be referring to the Arnold rendering workflow doc, just to kind of give you guys an understanding of where the information is and how it relates to what we're doing. But before I do that, let's tackle updating Arnold, because you guys will run into this at some point. All right, so one thing that is actually pretty necessary is for you to make sure that you at least have the Arnold plugin, which is MTOA version 4.2.1.1 or higher. If you just have 4.2, you will not have the denoise features built into the render view, which is a big deal. You need that for our class. Now, also, any version before 4.2.1.1 will not be able to tell you when to update Arnold. All right, so as we talked about it, Arnold should load automatically. Go to the Arnold menu, go down to About Arnold. So here is my version right here. It is MTOA 4.2.4. And like I said, a couple of days ago, it said, hey, guess what? There's a new version now. So I figured I'd wait and share the joy with you. All right, so a couple things that you need to make sure that you have. Your Autodesk information, if you need the login information, you don't have it memorized. You're going to need to get into your Autodesk account. And we're going to be going into a separate area for Arnold. Now, fortunately, this button for me should take me there. But what I'll do is I will copy the link and throw it into the chat line here. And anybody who wants it can download it. Or you can just write it down because it's not really that long of a link. Now, before you actually start the process of updating Arnold, you need to quit out of Maya. If you don't quit out of Maya and just install Arnold, it's not going to install because you got an old version running and it's not going to overwrite it while it's running. So let's go get latest. It's going to take me here. And the website's pretty easy, www.arnoldrenderer.com/download. So that's pretty easy to remember if you need that. Like I said, let me copy that. I'll throw it in here if anybody needs it. Also going to throw it into a doc here just in case. I'll save it for fun later on. All right, so now it's going to say, okay, you want version 5. Here, read the release notes. Yeah, you know what? If it says, I hate Maya 2020.4 and I'm going to screw up your entire life, then I won't download it. But if it doesn't have any threatening things in there, I think I'll go ahead and do it. System requirements. Yep, I got 2020 parallel preview renders on the CPU. Can render the material viewer and the swatch in parallel. Don't care about that. Scene units. Ooh, that's good news. GPU, we're not worried about that. Incompatible changes. All right, bug fixes. Uploading Arnold on Mac or Linux crashes Maya. Yay. That's a good fix. IPR, creating a camera bookmark triggers a re-render. That was a big pain. Because anytime you did anything, you looked at the camera and it started re-rendering again. So, good. MTOA automatically injects AI translator attributes in scene on save. Ooh, okay. I'm glad you took that out. Yeah, so this looks pretty good. I'm going to go for it. What the heck? So I want to go Mac. I got 2020, going to click this little link right here. It's going to ask me to log in. Oops, there's nothing here. What? Ooh, back to home page. Downloads. Mac OS X, Maya 2020. Okay. Well, guess what? I'm not going to be demoing this right now. Anybody try it and get any other results other than what I'm? You can't even get to the site? Oh, okay. Wow, that's really weird. All right. So, same thing. So this will, Jonathan said he was able to download it during break. Okay, that's probably because you were home on your Wi-Fi. So this will be, I'll continue this in another class. Right now, as long as you have a version. Oh, wait, Nadia says, I'm home on mine and I can't download it. So it could be everybody's hitting the website at once and it's being overloaded, which is a possibility. So what I'll do is I'll give it a shot tomorrow. If I can download it, I'll save the download and install it on my next lecture. If not, then we're not meant to use it. So right now, I'm just going to click OK and continue on my merry way. Like I said, I have version 4.2.4. You should have at least 4.2.1.1. If you have 4.2, that's not going to cut it. You're going to have to at least, you can go back to that page and get previous versions. So, you know what? Let me do that. Let me just show you that part. Third-party downloads page, Arnold for 3D Max. Yeah, just like I got. Okay. And I'm on a separate network, believe it or not, and I can't do it. So I've got a wired connection. I'm on the staff side of the network, which should be a little more forgiving, not necessarily. So what I recommend is on this page, looking for an old version of Arnold. If you do not have 4.2.1.1, here's what I want you to do. Visit the download archive and look for 4.2.4. That's the version that I have. That's the last version. Get that version until I've had a chance to try 5 out. All right, because I know that works. We've been using that for the past month and a half. All right, everybody good with that? So stick to the version you've got. If you've got an old version, and you'll know in a couple of minutes when I start demoing stuff and you go, wait, I don't have that, if you are part of that. So just go to www.arnoldrenderer.com/download/archive. You want the version 4.2.4. That's the one I'm going to use. That's the one I've got. That's the one I know works. .2.4, and obviously Mac unless you are running Windows. You want 2020. Yep. And usually on the Mac, yeah, Darwin is a good one. Package, it's a little arcane. The new stuff are all DMGs. That's because this is archived and compressed. So yeah, you want Darwin 2020 package, which is this one right here. Yeah, you have to sign in with your Autodesk credentials. Yeah, that's all right. You're still going to have to do that. Even though it is connected to Autodesk, it's still a separate subsidiary. So fill that stuff out as best you can. Yes. What version do you have? Yeah, that's not going to work. All right, hang on a second. Let me see if I have the downloader, I can upload it for you guys. Let's see, installs. No, I don't have it, unfortunately. Oh, let me see if I can download it. I might not be able to log in.
Jonathan says he put it in the chat.
He might not be able to because it's too big. Yeah, Jonathan, don't bother. I think it's going to be way too big for the chat. How big is it? Okay. That's way too big for Discord. It's still too big for Discord. What I can do is I'm downloading it now. I got pretty good wired connection. I will put it in FSO as a message and just send it to the whole class. If I get 5, well, I want to try 5 first before I say, yeah, sure, go ahead, do it. So if I get it, I will download it. I'll keep it. I'll install it for you guys. And if it screws up, at least I've got 4.2.4 I can go back to. But I don't want to kill everybody else. Yeah, Nadia, when you go to install Arnold, you need to quit out of Maya. That way it will install. All right, let me set up FSO. So peoples. That's what we want to do. Message class. One of those Windows people, huh? I got damn Windows people. Got to have a separate download. All right, downloads. There it is. Okay, let's see how this goes. Now, so this is for Maya 2020. Just be aware of that. Okay, looks like it went through. Yes, I do. Here you go. Oh yeah, enjoy. Okay, so there's your happy message. The die said that my Arnold isn't registered for me. You know, yeah, that's interesting. All right. Jonathan, I appreciate it, but it's going to take way too long for me to download it from the chat. I'm going to try and download it at home later on. Let's see. Nadia, which one are you trying to install? Yeah. Well, you don't necessarily have to do it now. Take notes. And then you can download it hopefully when there's less activity going on. All right, so let's move on and make sure we get through everything. Yeah, Nadia, call. And if you need a letter, I have one I can send you. So send me a message about that for your license. Okay. Well, what's that? It worked? Good. So that's the one I downloaded and or uploaded to you guys. Okay, good, good. All right. So hopefully it won't take forever and you'll be able to go on, but here we go. All right, so let's jump right into it. What I'm going to do is I already showed you guys the file that you'll be downloading. Let me go back and just kind of review that part. When you download, you know what? Let me just download it from scratch like you guys would. There we go. Okay. So here it is. When you download that, you will get 3 folders. You will get a Maya project folder, which is what you set your Maya project to before you open up the scene file. You're going to get a PSD folder, which contains 2 templates. One is the day scene and one is the night scene. Now, you are going to pick one day scene from the 4 images that we have below here. All right, we've got 4 different camera angles in there. So pick one that looks interesting that you would want to work with. It's up to you, doesn't matter. You're only doing one. The idea is for you to render this out to at least the production quality that we give you as reference. Now, reference images are inside the template and also in a separate folder here. So these can be loaded into the Arnold render view, and you can use them to kind of A/B back and forth between your render and what the reference looks like. And we've got 4 shots for nighttime. You will pick out one of the 4. The only one that's the same is kind of like this long shot that we have here for the whole room. So you're going to pick one of these. That is the bulk of your assignment. Render them out, production quality, get them to look good, put them in the template, save it out, and then you've got a third part to this assignment, which is basically going to allow you a certain amount of creative freedom. We call it a MyComp. And basically, from what I understand, you guys don't really get a lot of composing a shot in camera in many of your classes, right? Most stuff is done for you. Okay, a couple of times. So what this is going to do, hopefully then, is reinforce what you've already done. The idea is you're going to create a camera, look through the camera, you're going to frame up your shot so it more or less matches the reference that you guys are going to find. And here's the stipulation. You're basically going to do a layout, which is a very basic approximation of what your reference is. You're going to use our geometry, rearrange it, scale it, rotate it, move it around, get rid of it if you need to, get it out of the frame of the camera so that it resembles your reference image that you find on the internet. You're not going to light, you're not going to model anything. It's all about staging and composition. So you also have to be creative in trying to utilize the lights that are there so they work to your advantage to get the look and feel of your reference. And that's the key. Those are the 2 keywords, look and feel. We're not after pixel perfect. We're not after geometry, the exact lighting. It's all about, can you give the viewer the impression of the reference? Now, a lot of people get really scared and clench up. So I'm going to show you some examples from previous classes so you get an idea of what we're talking about. Where are they? There we go. No, come on. Resize for me. No. Okay. There we go. All right. So we don't have purple light in our scene, but basically, monster under the bed, got an approximation. Toy Story is always a favorite because they're toys and there's tons of objects in that room that you can piece together, basically Frankenstein together, to get the look and feel of Buzz or Woody or any of the characters. So nice overhead shot looking down. Pay attention, if you can, to a couple of things. Placement in the frame of the subject. Scale of the subject in relationship to the frame. We are doing this in a half HD aspect ratio, which for us, it's 960 wide by 540 high. It's called HD 540. It's a really convenient, small aspect ratio that translates well even if you resize it. But what we're after is trying to also to get the look of the camera lens that was used. So when we're all done talking about rendering, I'm going to give you a quick kind of tutorial on camera lens types. There are 4 basic lens types, and we take for granted that Maya provides us with the greatest lens on a camera ever. Everybody uses the default Maya focal length, which is 35 millimeter, which is a wide angle lens. It's like any point and shoot camera that's ever out there. Fixed lens cameras. So some camera angles and some camera types will tell you whether it's a wide angle or what's called a fisheye lens, or even a long lens, which is called a telephoto, based on how it looks. So very simple, you know, roughly scaled appropriately to the environment. This one, if you notice, everything looks sort of flat. Everything looks like there's not a whole lot of depth here. When you see something like that, that usually tells you it's a telephoto or a long lens. Because with telephoto lenses, we're basically taking a picture and magnifying something from very far away. When you magnify something, you're taking foreground, midground, background, and you are compressing those fields when you magnify it. It's called lens compression, and you tend to lose a sense of depth. So here, this is a lower focal length, which means it's probably low end of wide angle, almost to the point of fisheye, where everything kind of looks elongated. It almost looks stretched. That is an indication of a small focal length in a camera lens. And we're trying to have you guys start to notice this stuff, because when you get an art test, they're just going to hand you an image. And not only are you probably going to have to model it and light it, and texture it, but you're probably going to have to figure out, okay, what kind of camera did they use? Yes. Yes, I would agree completely. Yeah, no, I think you're right. And that's exactly why this is an example. Yes. Also, take notice of where it is in it, and the thing you point out also makes that bed look longer than the reference, which is all part of that stretch that we have. So yeah, that's a really good call. That is a little too low for that type of lens. So this one, the reason I like this is for the vanishing point. They really got the vanishing point. They're low on the ground. Those floorboards almost look like those trolley track rails. It just, it's really well thought out, very simple, but very effective. You immediately see where they got that from. And that's what we're talking about when we say look and feel. So very simple. You can be as, intricate and as clever as you want, spend as much time as you want on it. So here's another example, possibly too low of a camera lens, focal length too. Or something very simple like this, camera under the bed, couple of soda bottles that are there stretched out to stand in for the feet. But you immediately can see the relationship between the two. And that's really what this is all about. So this one, they duplicated the floor, put it side by side, kind of got the vanishing point, tilted the camera a little bit, which always makes everybody feel a little uneasy because we're used to looking at, horizon lines being flat. Overhead, probably a little too, high, far away. This one, lots of little pieces put together, but pretty effective. You immediately can see the relationship between the two. So like I said, you can spend a lot of time or you can spend a little time depending on how much time you're willing to give it. So get the idea, right? What we're looking for. Yeah. No. For the third part of this assignment, you are going to find your own reference off the internet. So I would highly recommend using photo reference, although something like Toy Story or another animated feature, that would work good too. As long as it's got a good level of quality to it. You can even take your own shots of your own room if you want to. Just try to compose it through the eye of a photographer. Just don't take a picture of your desk. Try to arrange stuff so it's a little bit interesting to the viewer. So you're going to find photo reference. Use one of our scenes as a starting point, either a day or a night. Any of the shots in the day contains the same geometry. So in fact, nighttime, daytime all contain the same geometry. It's just the lighting. Take whichever scene works the best for your reference. You got a nighttime reference, use a nighttime scene. Daytime reference, use daytime scene. Make sense? So you're going to create a camera, turn on resolution gate, look through the camera. I'm going to show you, kind of how to do all that. Frame it up. All right, so you can't move any lights, but you can turn lights off simply by selecting the light in the outliner and hiding it. If you want to unhide it, to hide it, it's Control H. To unhide it, it's Shift H. You got to make sure you select it in the outliner. Don't model anything. Don't import anything from another scene. Not a modeling exercise. You can change the color of your light if you want to. If you've got purple light or you've got green light, give it a little green tint, give it a purple tint. But you can't move any lights around. You can duplicate, scale, rotate, translate, rearrange all the stuff in the scene to your heart's content. You know, remove everything that is not going to be used in frame, move it out of the way, or put it on a layer and turn the display layer off. That way you're not calculating all that geometry for no reason when you go to render. Oh yeah, don't stretch or distort the reference in the top, because what you're going to be doing is taking your reference and replacing it in the template over our reference. And don't stretch it, keep it proportionate. Even if it doesn't fill the entire thing, just, you know, get it as big as you can, but don't stretch it. All right, does that make sense? All right, so let's get into rendering. So what I'm going to do is set my project to that Maya project folder I just downloaded. So opened Maya, file menu, set project. I happen to have mine in downloads, not a great place for it, but I'll move it later. And what I want to do is click on my Maya project folder and click the set button. This is all before I open up the scene. Now, once I've done that, I can go File, Open, and choose the day or the night. So I'm going to choose the day scene. Give it a couple seconds. It should show up in the render cam in wireframe with one of our bookmarks. Now, there is only one render camera. So how do we get 4 shots in a render camera? We use what are called camera bookmarks. So what you need to do is make sure that you are in the camera that you are working with, which in this case is the render cam. And you can do that simply by going to Panels, Perspective, and you can look through any one of these. There's a perspective camera. So I can kind of move it around, go outside the scene if I want to. But I want to go back to my render cam. And under View menu in the viewport, go down to Bookmarks. And you'll see there are 4 bookmarks, and I've got the focal lengths labeled for each of those bookmarks. So 16 millimeter, 35 millimeter. So this is the 16. Here's the 35. Here's the 24. That's kind of an overhead on the desk. And then finally, there's a 70 millimeter, which is kind of a close-up of the guitar and the amp near the window and the radiator with the bed. Now, a couple things to keep in mind. None of these cameras are locked. So you can actually, you can go in and accidentally move the camera. And if you do that, you're already in the render cam. So that's not going to reset it. Go back to the bookmark. All you have to do is go back to the bookmark and it will fly back to the right position. All right, does that make sense so far? So just remember, also, I have this information in here in case you forget. All right, anybody have a preference to which one I demo? I don't care, doesn't matter to me. They're all the same. Which one, down, bottom, right? Bottom left, that one. Okay. 24, that's what you said. Okay. I got these in my ear. I heard 4. Like, okay, cool. Okay, so let's do that. Let's go to the 24 millimeter, kind of the overhead shot. All right, want to make sure that you are in the Arnold shelf. Bunch of shelves that you have going across the top. The Arnold shelf contains the Arnold render view, Yeah. But you're in the render cam. And you didn't accidentally move the camera, right? So you don't see this when you hit 24. Try opening the scene again. Close it, don't save it. Just go File, Open, reopen it. You're doing day or night. Okay, because the nighttime is going to be separate camera angles. Yeah, so try reopening. Don't lock the camera. See if that helps. All right, so that's the Arnold render view, and the button next to it will render immediately. If you don't have the render view open, it'll open it up and start rendering. Personally, I prefer the render view because then I can prep and make sure I have everything I need and then hit render inside the render view. All right, so I'm going to open up my Arnold render view. And by default, it should render from the render cam. But if it doesn't, you've got a way to change it up here in the upper left. So this button will start the render process. Now, the first time you click that render button, it may take a couple of seconds for it to start. One thing it's got to do is build a file for the image if the image is visible, if your render has the outside the window visible. So now, there it goes. It's starting to process itself. I'm going to turn off my talking head because that kills a lot of resources from my computer. Just trying to display my Muppet head. All right, so this by default is the baseline quality that you get out of Arnold. We call this preview. It's quick, it's down, it's dirty. It tells you my geometry is there. It tells me my lights are working. It tells me a bunch of stuff. Now, once you've hit the render button inside the render view, it will continue to wait for you to do something and try to re-render. To stop it, just click the stop button at the top right. All right, so let's take a look at the image and talk about what we've got here. So inside the image, we've got a couple of areas. Here, on the chair, and a little bit on the computer right here. Those areas you see very little noise in. Okay, that's because these areas are what we call direct light. That means the sun outside the window is hitting the geometry directly with nothing in between. It doesn't have to bounce off of another surface to get there. Notice the interior of the scene, areas like in here, on the desk, back wall here. All of this is what we call indirect or bounce light. Now, in order for me to get my bounce light to look as good as my direct light, I need to have that renderer go back over that area many, many times. So when you first render, things in direct light will always clean up really fast. Most of the problem we're going to have is going to be with things that get bounce light or indirect light. So that's where we're going to spend most of our time trying to figure out how to clean things up. So you can see areas that are sort of indirect light here. They're a little noisy. They'll clean up a lot faster than these areas over here. All right, everybody understand that part, because that's pretty much the rendering game right there. But now it's trying to figure out, what do I need to change so that I don't globally make everything go crazy when I go render. All right, let me clear this. And let's go into the Arnold render settings. All right, so render settings, I like to use this little button here because I'm lazy. I hate going into menus. It's the little one that has a small gear and one of those clapboards from production. So click on that. That opens up your render settings. You'll see a common tab and Arnold renderer. So the common tab contains a lot of good stuff. This is where you set the size of your image. Right now, we've got everything set for you. By the way, for your comp, for the third part of this exercise, don't change the aspect ratio of the render. Keep it at HD, even if your reference is set for square. At this point, we're not changing the camera render size to match your reference. We're just trying to get in-frame look. All right, so image size, HD 540, 960, 540. Says renderable cameras. There's a bunch in here. You can come down here and change it. Since we're rendering out of Arnold's render view, we don't really have to worry too much with stuff in this common area. Arnold renderer. You'll notice in the Arnold renderer at the top, which is where we're going to spend all our time today, you've got camera AA, diffuse, specular, transmission, subsurface scattering, indirect volume. The only ones that we're going to worry about right now okay. Go ahead, be that way. There we go. All right. So the only ones we're really going to worry about are these two right here. Camera AA, AA stands for anti-aliasing, and diffuse. All the others, specular, transmission, subsurface scattering, we're not going to worry about them because our render right now is concerned with basic, non-reflective, for want of a better description, kind of clay-like material. They are called diffuse materials. There's nothing there, no shine on it, no reflectivity, nothing. In fact, we're going to be dealing with this for most of our lighting, just so we are not distracted. The whole purpose of this is if you can light it, make it look good with diffuse materials, you add materials, it's going to start to come alive. All right, so camera AA. Think of these, well, these are global samples. All the other attributes underneath camera AA are multiplied by the camera AA. So global samples and multiplier. Diffuse. This is your indirect or, wow, I can't spell. Indirect or bounce light. Think of global as direct light also. All right, so how does this work? Well, camera AA is the multiplier, but the number you see here, 3, sort of contradicts what you see up top. Up top, it says camera AA samples are equal to 9. And you say, what? what's that? All the numbers that Arnold displays are square roots. So the square root of 9 is 3. Now, under diffuse, you see, well, wait, that's 36. The square root of 2 is the square root of 4. How do you get 36? Well, here's how. It's basically the square root of 3. Well, 3 is the square root of 9, so it's 9. 2 is the square root of 4. 9 times 4 is 36. That's how it arrives at this. Same thing with the specular. If we had reflectivity on there, that would be how many samples the reflective portion of the render would get. Now, this is important because your camera AA samples should always be lower than the indirect or the diffuse, because you're going to need more samples to clean up these areas over here than you will indirect light areas. So here's kind of what we recommend. The setting of 3 and 2 is a preview quality render. Okay, if we bump up our camera AA to 4, that's also going to bump up my diffuse. So now I got 64. If I bump this up to 4, now it's going to be 256. Because remember, it is getting multiplied by the camera AA. 16 times 16 is 256. That's how it's getting that 256. So this would be considered to be kind of lower and medium quality. We're not quite at, moderate to high quality yet. Usually somewhere around between 6 diffuse or 8. Now we're getting into higher quality because we've gone and we've taken the indirect from 32 to 256, now all the way up to 1024. So this would be a good starting place for a production quality render. Now, this will not get rid of all the noise for you by itself. But let's see what these numbers do to our render. Now, here's the thing. When you're rendering, do I really need to sit here and wait for the whole scene to render? No. What we want to do is we want to focus in on a small area, render that out, see how it goes before we commit to a big full scene render. So we use this little tool right here, which is the crop tool. Click on that, left click and drag, and that will give you a region that it will now render in. So I'm going to pick one of the areas that's pretty noisy, like this is one of the noisier areas. And if I hit the render button, now it's going to go in and render utilizing the samples I plugged in down here. Let's move this out of the way. There we go. So you can see it's kind of going through. It's going to take quite a while to get there. But in the meantime, let's see what other numbers do. So we did 3 and 2. That renders really quick. And we're done. Now, to save renders or pieces of renders, down at the bottom, there's a little camera that will take a snapshot of what you've got done. So down here, if I click on that, that will save the render that I just did And if I click on it, it'll turn blue. Blue means I am viewing my saved image that I just took. Now I'm looking at my live image. Now I'm looking at my saved. So let me stop this. Let me change. Let's go 4 and 4. Let's render out that small chunk. It's still going to take a little bit more time because we've upped the render settings, but you should be able to see a progression in quality. All right, so there is my initial 3 camera AA, 2 diffuse. Now I crank this up to 4 camera AA, 4 diffuse. So you can see we've gotten a lot more quality out of it. Now here's the thing though. We're rendering right here on this one. I've only got 32 samples for indirect. And I would expect this at 256 to be a whole lot more quality, like 4 times the quality. But I'm not going to get 4 times the quality because the more samples we throw at a scene, we reach what are called diminishing returns. The render times go up, but we don't always get the amount of quality that we want out of it. So we have to reach a certain point where we go, you know what? If I throw any more samples at this, it's going to take an hour to render that small piece, and I may not get rid of all the noise. That's when we call in. So let me click save on this so we can see the difference. Let me do one more iteration with this at 4 and diffuse at 8. Now, at this point, once you start to get rid of the noise, this is where you want to bring in your reference to see what's my target. What do I need this to look like? So when this is done, we'll have a good idea of what it looks like without denoise. And denoise is actually going to be the last step that we add for the final render. What do I have running, man? Everything is running super slow. Okay. There we go. It's starting to clean up now. All right, so now my direct light samples are 16. My diffuse or indirect are 1024. I don't know if that's 4 times the quality. It's certainly better than that. Better than that. But you would think, wow, that's a lot of samples. Wouldn't it clean up a lot better? Now, to load reference images into Arnold, in the Arnold render view, go up to the File menu and go Open Image. You want to go to the folder that we provide for reference images. So we've got the day reference, and I want to choose this one. This will load into my render view. It'll come in and drop itself down here in the snapshot shelf. So there it is. So that's my target. You can see it's a whole lot smoother than this. So how do we get it that smooth? Well, once you get your samples up to like 4 for camera AA, 8 for diffuse, you might want to try turning on Arnold's denoiser, which is what we call an imager in the render view. Now, if you've downloaded 4.2.4 or 4.2.1.1 or higher, if you click on the gear icon, that will bring up your display settings. And you'll notice that there are 3 tabs. If you are using an older version of Arnold, you won't have the post tab. The post tab contains what are called imagers. And we want to use the denoiser noise. Yes, noise. That's what they call it. All right, optics only works if you are using an NVIDIA graphics card. If you're using anything else, use noise. For our class, even if you've got an NVIDIA graphics card on your PC at home, use the noise. It'll give you the same results and you won't have any wonky, because I've had other students try it and they get variable quality issues. Just use the noise. It's a software denoiser instead of using the GPU. So once you click on that, that will add a denoiser to the list here. It'll say AI Imager Denoiser Noise 1. And it'll come up here with, under main, some settings. Believe it or not, these settings, the default settings, are really good. If anybody wants to know what they are, you can go into our Arnold render doc. Oh, good, that's done. I can close that window. So there's the first part of lecture 1. All right. I already downloaded it. Let me log out. Okay. So all right. You get patch radius, search radius, variance. Right. So for the first part here, let's go back here. We've got patch radius. Patch radius is basically the amount of softness inside that area. And it's measured in pixels. So it's a 3-pixel kind of blur in there. The radius is the total area that's being processed. So it does it in 9-pixel by 9-pixel blocks. What it does is it tries to smooth out all the noise that's in there. And the default, this is the amount of the denoise effect. How much blur versus, it's basically denoise quality versus noise. Trouble is, if you turn that up too high, it makes it blurrier and makes it not look very good. But if you stick to the default settings, they are actually pretty good. So notice the patch radius says 3. You can change it to 2.5, but it's going to round up to 3. So the default's pretty good. Now, notice what happened while I was talking. It went ahead and denoised it for me as soon as I did that. Now, I'm going to pretend that it didn't denoise it. So this is what's going to happen. It's going to go through, do the same process that it did. It's going to go through, add all the quality in. Then it's going to continue to process. And once it's done denoising, all the noise will disappear in your render. So, yep, we're going to wait. Now, average render times for you guys, since you're not streaming and recording and doing all that, it should be under 15 minutes, a render. For me, it would take a whole lot longer because I'm busy doing a bunch of stuff. I did it on an older computer and it took me 20 minutes. I got a new computer last year and it processes pretty much equal to what yours does. All right, so we're getting there. Watch when it finishes, it'll stop. Look like it's not doing anything, but it's still going to process. And then it will get rid of the noise. So it's still going to process, and there it goes. Now, if you want to continue trying to get this to be a little less noisy or a little less, well, let me kind of show you what happens if you have two little samples. So let me go back to 3 and 2. If I hit the render button, it's going to go through really quick. It's going to denoise everything, but it's going to look like that. So there's less noise, but it looks like somebody sneezed on your screen. Compare that with this. So if you try to denoise something that doesn't have enough samples in it or enough information, it's going to look like this. So the whole idea is to balance time and quality with the denoiser. The denoiser is going to take a lot of extra time away from the back end. Before denoisers were around, we would have to throw like, 4 times the amount of samples I throw on this now. And it still would not get rid of all the noise. All right, so that is a definite no. You don't want to use that. Now, if you get to 4 and 8 and you think, okay, yeah, I could probably do a little bit better. Before you increase the diffuse, you might want to try bumping up the camera AA to like 5, maybe 6 tops. But just remember, every time you bump it up, it's going to take longer to render. So use the reference we give you guys as a guide. Does that make sense? Questions? Now, let's pretend that I did the entire scene and it looks great. How do you save out of Arnold? Well, you go up to File, Save Multi-Layer EXR. The nice thing is that Arnold will automatically put the .exr on there for you. So let me call this project 1 day. I hit save. Now, another nice thing about Arnold, some renderers, you close the render view, everything disappears in it. If I close this and open it again, all my stuff is still there. Now, here's something that is going to affect you. There it is. And this is kind of the downside. So it's in here. Arnold. Images, here it is. So notice I saved it out. I selected down in my snapshots, I selected the one that I wanted it to do. Okay. Unfortunately, Arnold doesn't let you choose a snapshot. It's only going to save the live render in your render view. So just be aware if you make some changes and think, oh, I'm just going to select the one I want to get out of my render view, it's not going to happen. So let me just render a small piece of this again right here. It's only going to save what you have live in the render view, none of the snapshots. That's kind of a pain. I really wish it would just allow you to, choose one, whatever one you got, because if you're going to make comparisons, you want to be able to take one, maybe not necessarily that you rendered just now. All right, so the only reason I'm doing this is so that I can show you how to bring these images into the Photoshop template. Now, something else you want to pay attention to. When you are rendering, take a look at the bottom left part of the Arnold render view. That tells you the size, the ratio. When it's done rendering, it will tell you the time. It'll also tell you the samples. All right, and it should denoise. There it is. So now, there it is. It took me 1 minute, 9 seconds to render that small piece. There's my size. There are my samples. This is where you get your render time from. And if you forget what's in your render view, you can just pick them off of here. You want the first two numbers. The first number is the camera AA. The second number is the diffuse. Of course, you can always go into the render settings and look. All right, now that I've got that done, let me hit the stop button. Let me go up here. Let me save multi-layer. Let's go new. Save that out. Now, if for some reason you want to disable your denoiser, because it's going to stay on until you tell it to not. So all you have to do is right-click on it, and you can disable it, which will temporarily turn it off. You right-click, you can enable it. Now it's set to go. You can also remove it. Select it, hit remove. It'll clear it out. All right, so here is my new EXR. So compare that with that one. All right, so I'm going to pretend that that's my perfect render, and I'm going to put it in my template. So I want to go into my daytime template, double click on it. I'm going to open it in Photoshop. Okay, one word of caution, Maya and Photoshop are both memory hogs. So I'm taking a real chance in having my computer just wig out because I'm recording, streaming, running Maya, and also trying to run Photoshop. So I normally quit out of Maya before I launch Photoshop. But I just thought if I, shut down, you can enjoy my anguish. What's that? I'm sorry, say again. Oh, yeah. Make sure you save your scene, especially if it's your final render. Always save it. In fact, that's probably what I should have done, is save this. So let's do a save as. There we go. Now I got my version in there. So if Maya does crash on me, at least I got it. Good point. Always save. That's something I usually do, and I tell students when I first start up, but I babbled and forgot. So whenever you open a scene up, do a save as. This way, if anything happens, you've got the original you can fall back on in case Maya does the unmentionable. All right, so what happens if you open up the template like we have here and you realize, wait, that's not my reference image? What do? Call FSO support, call Adobe, hey, something's wrong with Photoshop. No, it's on a different layer. So under the layers on the bottom right side of the interface, if you scroll down, you will see a reference folder. By default, the very first rendered image is turned on. Just turn the display off until you find the image you want. Like that's the one I'm going to use. So what I want to do here now is bring in the image that I just saved out, my EXR. So I'm going to go File, Open in Photoshop. Going to go to my folder. It's in my images. Now, whenever you open an EXR in Photoshop, you should get the Open EXR read options. One thing you don't want to do, I know it's common for people to drag files off the desktop into Photoshop. If you do that, it comes in as an object and not as pixeled image. You want to make sure you get this. You want to have the alpha channel data set to as alpha channel. The alpha channel happens to be where the image is for the light outside or the image outside the window because it's in a light. Now, to get this image into the template, select all. If you're in a PC or Maya, it doesn't matter, or PC or Mac, Command A to select all, or it's Control A on a PC. Copy it. Command C, going to come over here and paste, Command V. Take the move tool in Photoshop and now you can move it around. You want to bring it down here to this area. Okay. One thing I'm kind of a stickler about, and I'll point this out to you right now, is make sure that your render is snapped right to the very edge where it belongs. And honestly, when I'm kind of zoomed out in Photoshop, the snapping feature in Photoshop isn't all that great. It kind of overshoots a lot. I do have snap to guides turned on, but Photoshop is Photoshop, just like Maya is Maya. So I'm going to zoom in. And what I like to do is just grab it and just move it around until it's snapped. It should turn like pink when it's really snapped. I don't trust it. I always go around and look, make sure there are no borders, no edges, no like funky areas where there's a gap. Because nothing says I don't care about my stuff to a client or a company you're doing an art test for than sloppy placement of your image. They really look at that like, okay, how detail oriented are you? Do you care about what you present? Because you're going to represent our company at some point with what you create. All right, so just make sure it's snapped in there. Now, here's the render times. Down here, grab the type tool, come in. It was like, what was it? 0.19 seconds for me. All right, down here under camera AA, diffuse samples. I'm just going to double click here. So I had 4 down here. No, down here. Yeah. Let's go 8. And the denoise variance was 0.25. The only thing left is to plug in your watermark. That's basically right here in this area. It's going to be your name and the term ID, which is going to be 202111. So it's really kind of hard to see with how crappy everything was. Oh, come on, don't do that to me, Photoshop. No, don't do that. No. All right. I think what I'm going to do is when I pasted it in there, it dropped it in on the top layer here. Let me just find my. So nice thing about Photoshop is if you can't get to where you want to undo stuff, Photoshop has a history palette, which in theory will go back 50 steps, and it's non-linear. So I can go back to any part where I am, any part of this assignment. All right, so I went back here before I accidentally deleted this. And let me turn off my layer. There we go. So that's my watermark. Make sure your watermark opacity is set at 15%. This way, when it goes on top of your nice render, not my crappy render, we'll be able to see it's your name, but it won't interfere with the render. Does that make sense? Last thing you want to do once you've got all that in there is go in Photoshop, File, Save As, and you want to save it as a Targa file format. Why Targa? Why not JPEG? Why not PNG? Why not something else? All right, JPEGs, PNGs are lossy. They are compressed. When files are compressed, information is thrown out. When you reopen the file, it is recalculated based off of the existing pixels. So imagine the screen up there is my picture, and I want to compress it. What's the best way to compress it? Remove information that you either don't need or can reconstruct. Photoshop and JPEG, well, not Photoshop, but JPEGs work like this. It sees, depending on your compression ratio, let's say you go, I want the maximum compression. I want my file size to be really small. JPEG is going to go in and go, okay, I see a lot of white there. I'm going to trash all the white except for a couple of pixels. So when you close it, all those pixels that were white are gone except for 3 or 4. So you get rid of a lot of information, makes the file size small. What happens when you open it up? Well, when you open it up, it says, okay, we got to expand. We have, 300 pixels that are missing. These are white. Reconstruct them off of the 3 we have or 4 we have left. So it'll reconstruct it. But what happens if you've got a pixel that is really close to white, but not quite dark, no, not quite light gray? It's somewhere in between. Well, depending on how much you compress it, it may throw that out also. It may not consider it to be needed. So what'll happen is you will throw stuff out, close it, you got a smaller file size, open it up, it'll rebuild everything, but it may substitute the wrong shade of gray, the wrong color white, the wrong color yellow in there to try and make up for it. And that's why you see in some really, really small JPEG files that are open, you see things that look a little splotchy. That's because of the file compression. Now with JPEG and PNG, every time you close and open, you remove information, reconstruct it. After 10 times, you degrade the file 50%. So what I recommend is anytime you're going to work on an image, you download something off the internet. You're not sure if you're going to be needing it, you're going to go in and edit it. First time you go in and try and work on it, open it in Photoshop, save it as a PSD. PSD file will not compress anything it can't reconstruct completely. The Photoshop native format will let you keep layers. It'll let you keep a file that is not destroyed or deconstructed. Now, Targa files are good because they are not as lossy as a JPEG or a PNG. They hold a lot of information, a lot of quality, but the file compression is very mild compared to all the others. So it actually was the file format of choice before EXRs came along. So it's a really good file format that is still in use. And for our purposes, it provides a good quality image without the file size being really big. So to do that in Photoshop, go under Format, and you'll notice, well, crap, it doesn't give me an option. Well, thanks to the new versions of Photoshop, you have to click the Save a Copy button, which is kind of silly. Save a copy. Oh, okay, it's saved. Put the word copy, and now it'll let me choose Targa. Get rid of that word copy. So Targa format, get rid of the word copy, put the right file name in. I'm just throwing a name in there. Hit save. Targa options. For this assignment and for all our templates, 24-bit is fine. Later on, when we get into creating alpha channels, when we start texturing, we will use 32-bit, but we don't need it right now. All we need is RGB information. So 24-bit, hit OK. I'm going to quit. Don't forget, save your Photoshop PSD before you quit. I'm going to do a save as, save it as Photoshop. This way, if I have to open it up again and redo my scene, I've got the PSD for it. So now here's my Targa. It's got all my information in there. Well, theoretically, this would be a really nice render, not a big piece of bird dropping. You go through, do the same thing with the night scene. Does that make sense? The workflow. Questions? Anybody in Zoom? Anybody got questions in Zoom? Jonathan, Michael, Milton. Oh, Milton, you're here. Nadia, anybody got questions? Nadia is good. Michael, Jonathan. Okay. So when you go to do your comp, put your reference in the top, put your render in the bottom. Pick one of the templates that works for you. It doesn't matter which one you use, honestly. They contain the same information. All right, let's talk a little bit about, before we break for dinner, let's talk a little bit about camera lenses. All right, so a lens, glasses, a camera, they do one of two things. They can focus light. In the case of glasses, we're focusing light so it, what we're viewing appears sharp to our eyes. Without them, everything, well, looks a little blurry for me. So, or it can disperse light. We can use a camera lens to soften the image. Now, camera lenses, as I mentioned earlier, are broken up into 4 categories. The first is called fisheye. Now, camera lenses are measured from the back of the camera lens, the lens itself, the glass, to the camera sensor. Based on that distance, that's considered your focal length. Also, the shape of the lens makes a difference. So for a fisheye lens, it's got a small distance between the camera lens and the actual camera sensor. But it also has a curved top, very similar to the eye. They call it fisheye for a very good reason. It's got that curved fisheye look, those fish laying in Publix on ice looking up at you. So what we're doing is we are shrinking the image onto the camera or onto the sensor. Think of it like looking through the peephole of a door. You're trying to get as much information about what's on the other side of the door as possible. So it gives you almost a 180 view of your environment. So consequently, we get this barrel distortion. It looks like this. Or it may look like it's taken through or off of a reflection on a mirror ball. So the range of the camera focal length is usually somewhere between 2.5 and 15. That's if you have a variable lens. You can change the distance by just moving the lens in and out a little. Now, if you are a professional photographer and you're buying lenses, you're probably going to buy what's called a fixed lens, means it's got one focal length and it's got one purpose. Camera, photographers can spend thousands of dollars on lenses. But if you're a professional photographer, you need the right lens for the right shot to get you the effect you want. And that's why you study photography, just like you study any discipline to get good at it, to know when to use it, when not to use it. So if you're doing it, like common fisheye lens types usually be like, I don't know, 2.5 is kind of rare. It's really extreme, but you may see things like 6 millimeter, 9 millimeter, 12 millimeter, something along those lines. Now, wide angle has a little bit of curvature on the top of the glass. It's got a longer focal length distance. It's between 15 and 45 millimeters. Really common lens types are going to be something like 16, which is really on the low end. That's almost a fisheye. 24, 35. You might see something in the 40s, but hardly. 35 millimeter is what I like to call the realtor's friend. Anytime you take a picture of a house, an environment, a backyard, a bedroom, a closet, a bathroom, they take a wide angle lens shot because it makes things look a little expansive. How many of you saw your apartment or house online before you moved into it? Right? Yep. I did the same thing. Oh man, those pictures look great. You go in there and it's like, yeah, that backyard was so big. And then you get there and it's like you step out of the yard and there's a foot before there's a fence. It's like, wait a minute. How did you do that? Magic, through the magic of photography. It's all about trying to make, it's not dishonest. It's just trying to enhance what's there and make it look better. It's called advertising. Yeah. Well, there's a fine line between truth and non-truth, as we all know, and you can blur the edges of it, which is what advertising does on a daily basis. You know, it's always selling you a product that you really might not necessarily need, but somehow they convince you into, gee, I really would like to have that. I know. I worked in advertising, so it paid bills. That's all. That's all I'm going to say. So back to this. A friend of mine who's a photographer took a couple of shots. This was a 24mm lens, and this was 16. Maya's default camera in any Maya scene, in any Maya camera that you have, is 35mm. That is the standard, the most used camera focal length probably in the world, because a lot of cameras have that by default. They'll have something like it. Now, I'm not going to get into, well, there's half frame, full frame sensors, and half frame doesn't translate into 24mm if you have a 24mm. All right, I'm just giving you basic camera lens theory, because these things, they do not generally have what are called full frame sensors. They say, oh, it'll take 4K, my pictures. But the camera sensor itself doesn't really have a full 4K. It's got 4K-ish on it. And it's saying 4K, but wait, it's a 10mm lens. Why doesn't it look like a fisheye? Well, that's because it's not really full frame, and it changes how the camera handles it. Okay, I don't want to get into that because that's confusing as heck. Just, we're going with traditional photography, and Maya sort of treats it the way traditional photography does. So let me go in and just go back to Maya for a second. Let me open up a blank scene. All right, so blank scene, brand new scene. Go into my outliner, click on a perspective camera. I get 35mm. Click on my top camera, 35mm. Front camera, on the side camera, everything's 35mm. I create a brand new camera in Maya. Let's click on it. Camera shape 1, camera 1, 35mm. Everything is 35mm. A lot of people don't realize that. See, I created my own camera. Looks great. Yeah, but your reference isn't quite 35mm, but yeah. And sometimes people who don't understand this will try to match something up or model something, but it doesn't quite look right because their camera doesn't match the camera that the reference was taken with. Now, you don't have to be perfect at it. I'm just trying to get you guys to be aware that this happens, and it can help your scene look more like your reference if you can try to figure out what kind of distortion you have going on. There's always going to be lens distortion. So we get into 50, or oops, let the cat out of the bag. We go into what's called a normal camera lens, which is honestly, for all intent and purposes, a portrait lens. Portrait lenses, which are typically 50 millimeter, that is probably the next most popular lens on the planet next to 35, because pretty much any portrait you take is done with this lens because it doesn't shrink the image or magnify the image onto the camera sensor. It tries to maintain exactly what it sees. Now, if you're a modeler, that's really kind of the ideal situation. You're getting kind of a one-to-one transfer. You're not worrying about, well, that elongation, is that depth of field, is that stretching because the lens is too low? Is it the shape of the object that's doing that? What is it? We can make a lot of guesses based on what we know, but we're still making some guesses. So if you get the option of asking for 50 millimeter on something, you shouldn't have to worry about modeling in any distortion. Generally, though, I'm not sure that you want to have that for reference of a really big area, just because you're not going to get as much into one shot as you would like and have it look good. All right, so the last one is going to be telephoto. This, we are magnifying something really far away and putting it on the camera lens, the sensor. As I mentioned earlier, telephoto, you're magnifying something, you're taking foreground, midground, background, zooming it in, but we're compressing the fields. So this lens compression gives us the illusion that, well, I can't tell, are these buildings attached? Is there an alleyway between them? Is there a highway between them, 2-lane, 4-lane? Not really sure. In sports, absolutely necessary, because a lot of times you don't want a photographer running around on the field, getting in the way of play, or possibly getting hurt. So use one of those really big long lenses that looks like a tank barrel, and you can be, several hundred yards away and get a really great shot. But the problem is you get this compression. So we got 3 players stacked on top of each other. We really don't know how far apart they are. We can kind of make a guess, but that lens compression kind of makes all the planes almost look like the same size. You see that? So when you have that situation, that should kind of tell you right there, okay, that's probably a long lens. For something like a sports photo, it's not really an issue. But if you're doing something at night, you need to bring out the depth in the scene. So that's where you might want to light something differently so that you can separate the foreground, the midground, and the background. So you get that depth back. So if you're looking at reference for your third part of Project 1, and you see stuff piled on top of each other, and you really can't make a guess as to how far apart you think everything is, then probably a telephoto. The most common ones are going to be like 70 millimeter. That's usually the bottom go-to. 70, 100, 200, 300, 400. They're usually in 100 millimeter ranges. They can go all the way up to as big as you can carry it, or you get a truck to carry it for you. It says infinite, but I mean, there is a finite number, but it can be really big and ridiculous. But that's not going to be something you're going to buy. That's going to be something that somebody else is going to have, or they're going to lease it to you, because it costs like, 100. It's like going to NASA and saying, hey, can I borrow your telescope for a minute? I want to take a picture on the moon. And they're going to go, sure, $100,000 an hour. What? All right, now, a couple of things when you're framing your shot. So I've created a camera. First thing you want to do is look through the camera. If you're not sure how to do that, all you have to do is select it, go to panels, look through selected. All right, so there I am. Let me zoom out, zoom up. Now I'm in there, camera 1. How do I set it to be the resolution so I know exactly what I'm seeing will be what's rendered? You turn on what is called resolution gate. So that is this white outline with a kind of turquoise or cyan circle in the center. That gives you the resolution that you have set in your render settings. Right here, image size. So now, if I hit the render button and render through this camera, I'm pretty much going to get what I see. Now, if I create a couple of objects, let me just create a couple of polyspheres or here. All right, so my camera right here, 35 millimeter. Pretty simple. Everybody gets it. So if I want to try something like fisheye, so let's go like 12 millimeter. Notice it looks like I kind of stepped back and everything got smaller. But when I go to zoom in, look at the shape of the spheres. It kind of reminds me of like, I don't know, Star Trek going to warp drive, where everything just becomes elongated as you're going by. Now, unfortunately, with Arnold and Maya, you're not going to get the real true kind of barrel circular distortion you get with a real lens. You'll get the distortion, but not that curved pattern, which is kind of a shame. You can sort of get it. Arnold's got a couple of settings in the camera, but they're really not all that accurate. Anyway, so I can set this to be 24. Not quite as much distortion. 35. Oops, not 360. Really? Okay, 35. So if I go to 50, you can see really not getting any distortion at all. If I go to 70, the real trick comes when you start to overlap this stuff. So let's compare that with 35. Now I get a real sense that this is in front, that's in the middle, that's in the back. Change that to 70. Now I'm really not sure how far away they are. Go to 100. It gets even worse. They all look like the same size now. They could be right on top of each other, but look, they're not. So all that is based on how the camera displays depth. That kind of makes sense? So start to think about this kind of stuff, and this is how you change it when you're going to start doing your own comps. Okay, and don't forget, use this doc. If anybody's found an error in it or find something that's either unclear or if you think it's missing, let me know. We're always trying to keep this updated. All right, so we did that, we did that. All right, Anybody got any questions before we break for dinner? All right. So thanks for hanging in there and a lot of information. So let's go. Oh, let's go 5:15. We'll get out of here. Come back to lab at 6:15 for dinner. No, come back at 6:15. Don't eat dinner here. All right. If I don't see you guys, I will see you on Wednesday, same time. Anybody in Zoom have questions? You guys doing all right there? All right. I'll see you guys in about an hour. Might not be able to join, so yeah. All right, Nadaya.